Welcome back to These Things Are Written on this Friday. Glad that you have joined us throughout this week and throughout our time looking at the book of Acts. As we look at this and as we continue, remember that Paul has been sent on to Rome. He is traveling by ship under guard of a centurion named Julius. He's being sent to Rome so that he could finish his appeal to Caesar. We pick up the reading as Paul has just told them that they need to stay in fair havens on the island of Crete for the winter, but everybody else decided not to listen to him, and they are moving on. We continue with Acts 27, verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called northeasterner struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard and with their own hands. When neither sun nor star appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have told you. But we must run aground on some island.'" This is the word of the Lord. Luke's audience obviously understood more about sea travel than we do. Especially being in the most landlocked state in the Union in Nebraska. Now, realize some of those things that he talked about, and again, Luke loves to give the details, especially when he was there and could recall them. There was a south wind that started blowing. Usually those south winds lead to good traveling, and it was the wind that they needed. And then the wind switched to the northeast. Now, even here in Nebraska, the northeast winds or the north winds or northeast especially almost always seem trouble, especially around that time of the year, around October or November. The weather, the temperature changes. Often there's rain or even snow that occurs with them. And when that happens, they lost control of the ship. The ship's, it talks about the ship's boat. That confused me a little bit, so I did some researching. That was a small boat that was towed behind. It was usually used to shuttle people, maybe some supplies from the ship to the shore if they didn't want to go to port. So that was what they had pulled up close behind them. Remember, they didn't have lifeboats back then. That was their only way to escape. Cables or ropes were put around the stern, the hull to secure that so it wouldn't be broken apart by the crashing waves. And then it says that they lowered their gear, they lowered the sails because they didn't want to be pushed to the southwest so far to some big sandbars that were off the coast of Libya that the sailors were scared of. So instead of being blown by that strong a northeast wind to the southwest, they lowered their gear. And then later on, the next day they tossed cargo, and then they tossed their tackle. And as they were tossing those things, they were also jettisoning their hope. After many days of neither sun nor stars, Luke writes, all hope of our being saved was abandoned. But Paul gave them hope. Actually, God gave them hope through Paul. God's promise was given to Paul as an angel appeared before him. And notice how he says that. An angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship appeared to him and said that there would be no loss of life, that God would keep his promise, that he gave to Paul, that Paul would stand before Caesar. And now Paul is saying, trust me, because I trust in the one true God. Also, maybe he was saying, just a little bit, trust me, because after all, if you had listened to me, then this would not have happened. So what does this mean for us today? God delivers even in the most difficult situation. In the midst of struggles, trust in God's deliverance. Trust in his guidance. It doesn't mean that everything will work out perfect on our behalf. But what it does mean is that God will lead us through every situation, every difficulty, every step along the way. May we trust in God in the midst of our storms of life, as Paul was encouraging the people to trust. Go now in peace, and we will see you next week.